Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, I have a fantastic guest who has been through so much herself and has the most resilience I've probably ever seen in a human being. And she teaches how parents can become mentally strong and help their kids become mentally strong. And she is just a really inspiring person. But before we get into that, I do want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the US and outside of the US. And you can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is the right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That is treatmyocd.com. So before we dive into our conversation today, I want to introduce you to Dr. Cristi Bundukamara, which I'm probably mispronouncing her last name because I'm notorious, but we'll call her Dr. B. That's what she goes by. And you're going to hear her own incredible story of loss for the last 2 decades. I'll let her tell her story. And she is a psychiatric nurse practitioner. She has her doctorate, but she also has such lived experience raising her own children with various issues, which you'll hear her talk about, and her own approach to how to navigate this world in a mentally strong way. And mentally strong, as she'll talk about, doesn't mean just grit and sticking with it. It's different, much different than that. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Dr. B. Well, I want to welcome Dr. B to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm excited to share for sure.
Yeah, I was just telling you before we technically hit record that I don't have a lot of guests that come on the show. Really, the general podcast is just me rambling on and talking. Mm-hmm. And when I do have a guest, it's because either I know them, they're a colleague or a friend, or there's someone I've admired, and I wanted to have them come on, which is like infrequent because it's not a guest format type of podcast, mm-hmm. or something about the guest is just so fascinating to me that, because I was telling you, I get a million PR email. I must be on some sort of PR email list, like dozens a day. But I saw the email about you and I was just so taken back. I want to start with your story because I was just struck by your story and your resilience. And that's kind of why I needed to have you on. I watched, you have this, we'll get into this, but you have this beautiful documentary, so well done, that really highlighted your journey. And I really feel like you are kind of a walking, talking example of resilience. And let's get into it.
Yeah.
Let's start with maybe just you introducing yourself and let's dive into your story.
Yeah. So professionally, I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner with a doctorate degree, but my real experience comes from my life. And you know this as well. I adopted 5 children from the foster care system, and I had 2 biological children. And the kids that came from the foster care system had pretty significant attachment and loss, diagnosed with anxiety, 2 of them with pretty severe PTSD, 1 with reactive attachment disorder, all types of anxiety manifestations of their early childhood trauma. And then I had 2 biological children who I later found out had a rare neurodegenerative condition called DRPLA. And my husband also had it. So here I am raising 7 children, and I had my first loss. Johnny died in a drowning accident. He was one of my adopted children. And his 2 biological sisters, their symptoms of anxiety and PTSD and reactive attachment just really exemplified after his death.
I bet.
And then within a year, my biological son, and the only reason I differentiate adopted and biological is because the one, it's a genetic disorder that my biological children had, but the the significance of the anxiety and PTSD that my adopted children had. And then my son, Reggie, was diagnosed with catastrophic epilepsy. We did not know where it was coming from. He just all of a sudden was having 12 plus seizures a day.
Wow.
It took them about 3 years to find the diagnosis. And then when they tested the whole family, my other biological child had it and my husband had it. They were not sick like Reggie. We spent 10 years in the midst of Reggie being catastrophically ill, getting worse with every seizure. By the time 2016, he was wheelchair bound, not speaking anymore, fed in a G tube, and he ended up passing away in 2016. My daughter also passed away 5 years later in 2021, and my husband most recently. And I say all that because, I mean, this is over a 20-year lifespan. But, I know that there are listeners that are going through overwhelming stuff. When we have children, whether you consider it a special needs child or just, anxiety that is impeding, we are constantly focusing, and we do this as mothers, like it's innate, like we pour into our children. And there's so much that I have learned from this process, this, 20 years of just, continuing to work on myself, take care of myself, and make sure that I can continue to help other people. So I created the Mentally Strong Method when I was in the midst of raising all those children. It was really just my survival. And now I teach that. And then I also have created a curriculum called Raising Mentally Strong Kids because I did a lot of things wrong. And this is why they talk about, grandparents have all of this wisdom, right? Because it's like we realize all the things that we did wrong, as we were raising our children and what we could have done better. And so the curriculum is based on child development, but it's the first activity that I do when I'm teaching parents. I have this growth wheel and it like starts in the middle with genetics and it kind of goes out how utopic development would happen, right? And I have the parents kind of mark where they developed properly in those areas and where they were lacking in those areas. Did they get a chance to, emotionally develop? Did they get a chance to build their confidence? And we all have holes in our own personal development. And we often do the opposite with our children. And so we put holes in different areas because we're compensating for where our parents were lacking or our situation was lacking. And so then we kind of pour into that area, but then we leave holes in the other area.
So true. That's interesting. It's a good visual.
Yeah.
So I wonder where we start with that. Because it sounds like, and you had a great quote on your email. Let me see if I can find it. Maybe you know it. Hold on, I'm going to look for it because I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a great quote. It's like at the end of, we may not control our children's genetics or life circumstances, but we can shape the environment, skills, and relationships that foster mental strength at every stage of their growth and development. I love that.
And we do it by like feeding ourselves. Our kids are going to do what we do. They're not going to do what we say.
Right.
So if we are taking care of ourselves mentally, we are learning how to manage our own anxieties. They're more likely to model that than they are to fix what we've identified as dysfunctional or a diagnostic criteria.
100%. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think a lot of times parents don't want to focus on themselves. For lots of different reasons. I think they can feel guilty, like it is selfish or self-absorbed for me to focus on my stuff when my kids are so desperate and need help. Also, it's more raw to focus on our own stuff than focusing on our kids. And there is that need sometimes for a quick fix of, they're having these symptoms. And as a psychiatric nurse, you're totally aware of this and fix these symptoms, give them the right medication or the right therapy, or it's always external for, not always, but for some people.
Yeah.
And that shift back of, it's a win-win when we focus on ourselves. It's good for our own mental health. And then it's really good for our kids.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can tell me where you started on your own personal journey, because you've been in perpetual grief
Hmm.
for 2 decades. I mean, and I can't even imagine. I've been in grief for 4 years,
Hmm.
and just having that sudden loss and the trauma, I think that added trauma of discovering a loved one,
Hmm.
suddenly, like your daughter, that
Hmm.
to me, that's another layer, that's like a
Yeah.
PTSD response on top of it. And then prior to that, having a chronically like debilitating medical condition with your son, and then watching your husband slowly get debilitated by the same disease.
Yeah.
How did you find your resilience and anchor yourself?
I've always been a proponent of cognitive behavioral therapy. Like I see it as so valid. And when I was, trying to do these, I know the way that I think is going to impact my mood, and working on those things, I realized that there was more to it than that, right? Like that helps our negative belief system, kind of the negative neural pathways going on in our brain. But what do we do with this grief? What do we do with trauma? And we say this all the time. Oh, you have to process your grief. You have to process your trauma. But we don't. What is process? Like, what does that mean? And how do you do it? And I do think it's different for different people. There's professional ways to do, process trauma, EMDR, brain spotting, things like that. But there's also energetic ways to do it. It's a lot of insight and self-awareness. I think especially, I would say probably more than half of mothers in this country are on survival mode.
Hmm.
We are doing it all. Many are, including working outside the home, raising children, and then all of these expectations to do it right, have them in sports, do this, you have to be doing this, you have to be in these therapies. And we are just surviving. And we think of resilience as grit as that. Like, but this is what's causing the chronic fatigue, the chronic medical conditions of, elevated cortisol and things like
Hmm.
that. And so how I did it like every other mother after my first loss, and in the midst of this of the trauma of raising a child with catastrophic epilepsy. And sometimes in the midst, you actually can't take a full step back and take care of yourself wholly.
Hmm.
And I get that. I am speaking of a place of the trauma's over for me,
Hmm.
right? And I can take care of myself. But after the first trauma, it was like what I think everyone is in. After losing Reggie, I really was able to take a step back and do what I call controlled grief. The problem with grief and trauma is grief and trauma and everything else, it gets enmeshed together. And really, grief is to be cherished. That's a pain. That's your story. You,
Yeah.
you know, you and your husband, and losing that relationship is part of the story. I talk about it as like maybe losing a limb.
Hmm.
Could you learn to function without that limb again? Absolutely. Could you find joy and happiness without that limb? Yes. But there are always going to be moments that you're going to be reminded that that limb is not there. There's always going to be moments that, you grieve the loss of that. And the same is true of all types of grief.
Hmm.
But trauma, if we don't get rid of it, so we often attach the trauma to the story and we hold on to it.
Hmm.
And if we don't get rid of that trauma, as a licensed therapist, that it's going to show up in our body,
Yeah.
mentally, physically, it's going to show up. And so learning how to separate the grief from the trauma. And I started doing this, very actively with, once Reggie had passed. But then I get hit with this other trauma of losing my daughter, where although she had the same disorder, she was not sick.
Hmm.
And what I realized after the third kind of break is that it really is all spiritual. Like it comes down to, and this goes back to even if you have a normal child and you have what you want for that child and you feel responsible for raising that child, but your child is not just yours. Your child is here in this earth for a reason, for a purpose,
Hmm.
they have their own journey, and we can guide them. We have a very, very powerful influence over our children, but we don't have control. We want control.
Yeah. Yeah.
we want it, but we don't actually have it. And that is more of a, if we look at it from a you know, a universe, God, however you want to say it, perspective, it does two things. It sometimes increases our anxiety about, now I have this little soul that I'm responsible for. But also it could take away some of that anxiety that this is bigger than just me.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all going to make mistakes. I don't know one mother of adult children that can say that they did it all right. Like
Yeah,
we all we
exactly.
all say, oh gosh, I did that wrong, I did this wrong, I did that wrong. um yeah, so I learned, by having to do, I did a lot of things wrong, specifically on the anxiety of, I really had this notion that, like in the movies, if you adopt a child, all you have to do is love them and their past hurts are going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just not true. My adult children have come a long way and there's, lots of positive things, but they still struggle with the trauma from their past. We all do.
Yeah, yeah. And I like what you first said about the journey. I think that
Mm-hmm.
philosophical shift, and that's really helped me too. And I almost feel like it's not like you have to have a horrible loss in order to have this perspective, but I do feel like for me, it catapulted
Mm-hmm.
my spiritual view of like life and purpose and why we're here. I mean, and I think grief can do that to you for some people,
Yeah.
but that has helped me too. That idea of I don't own this journey. Like my kids and their souls on a spiritual level too, whatever your
Mm-hmm.
belief system is, it doesn't matter,
Right.
you know, have their own story and their own journey. Because I think as parents, we own things too much. We're
Mm-hmm.
like, almost it's symbiotic. Like if my child's
Mm-hmm.
doing well, I'm doing well as a parent. If my child's not
Mm-hmm.
doing well, then I have failed somehow and I'm doing something wrong. And it's not as black and white as that. And that has
Right.
really helped me with my own grief around my children's diagnoses because all three of my kids have anxiety and OCD and
Mm.
really struggle. It feels like they take turns, struggling, but and I have to, currently it's my son is more of the front burner issue, but there's
Mm.
always somebody in crisis and I have to kind of accept that where I want them to be and where they're meant to be or where like their journey is are two different places. And so
Yeah.
that grief and then moving into acceptance of it doesn't mean that I'm going to accept his disorder and his struggles and all the things that are going on with him so that I don't help him. The
Mm-hmm.
help is still there and the support is still there, but the philosophy of I don't get to hit like the gas pedal. I don't get to control this and the looser my grip on expectations and processing my own grief of this isn't what I thought he would
Yeah.
have at 15 or what will look like at 18 may not be what your typical 18-year-old is going to look like and he's supposed to be driving right now and I'm like I don't know if I really want him behind a car right now
Mm-hmm.
and so that grief of maybe that's not what it's going to look like at this age and that really speaks to me the way you're saying that.
Yeah. And it's really all of these things that are not going the way that we want are triggers for expansion. They don't have to be
Mhm.
triggers for our own anxiety and depression and, our own negative thoughts. Like it could be a trigger for expansion. Like, that's been a real shift for me because, in the mentally strong method that I've been using for 20 years, I talk about triggers kind of pushing internal buttons and working on those internal things. And now I'm realizing that every time something is a trigger, it's an opportunity for me to be a bigger person, to expand my understanding of my environment, of the people around me, their their journey. I was speaking at an event that was all special needs moms, and I would say half of them had pretty severe, kind of like my son, um, life-threatening type of things. And one of the moms stood up and she said, "But what do we do right now? Because my child could die any day.
Mm.
I'm in constant fear and I have a right to be afraid, right? Like
Mhm.
this could actually happen." And I said, try to connect with their soul. We often we have a connection with our children and we have a soul connection with our children, but we don't often think of it that way. We think of it more as like their personality and our personality and how we're working together and trying to improve ourselves both, but like trying to get to the soul of your child. And I think I said it out loud and then I've really been thinking about it. I think that's true of any parent. Like if we could truly connect to their purpose instead of what we think, especially in this, Western culture of, well, they should be going to college and then they should get a job that pays well, because if they can't pay well, like we're constantly thinking about how they're going to show up in the world instead of who they are in the world. And if we could just try to figure that out on an intimate level, and it's going to be different for everyone. Some of us have kids that, you can see their soul on their sleeve because they just show it, they wear it, and then others, it would take a lot of, trying to get under the fear that's manifesting. Like, where is this fear coming from? Yeah, just trying to think of it bigger than psychiatry, psychology, what the world is telling us. You have a precious soul in your care.
I love your perspective. It's so good. It's so good. When my husband passed away, I was in like traditional therapy for a little while and I did EMDR. I actually, my grief journey was so similar to yours, like trying everything. Like it looked very familiar. If I did a recording of everything that you were doing, I was right there with you. And eventually I landed with a soul coach, and she was just like, she was like non-religious, just like she was just a soul coach. She just talked in generalities and she was the most helpful out of everything I had tried. And I wound up talking to her a lot about my son, who's more of my front burner struggle since my husband passed away and prior to that. And I love what she would always say. She would say things like, because I would talk about my struggles and showing I'm trying to get him to do this or that, or, and what is my purpose? What's his purpose, on a bigger scale. And she would just be like, can you just love him? Like, maybe it's an invitation to, can you love him right now? Can you love him like this? Can you love him like that? And it was like, just this move into acceptance of, because it's hard for difficult kids when we're challenged. And a lot of people who are listening have kids that are literally like trapped in their rooms. The OCD is so bad they can't leave the room. They haven't left the house in years, these are the extremes, but I hear them all the time.
Yeah.
Not going to school, not functioning, not living a life, truly not well. And that invitation, she would always say, like, what is this inviting you to do? It's like she wouldn't say much, but whenever she did, she was an older woman, whenever she would say something, it was just this like poignant, like, I wonder what that's an invitation for, and I loved your trigger for growth. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Expansion.
I love that. Oh, expansion.
Yeah.
I love that too. It's like, this is happening for you, not to you.
Yeah.
And that's a hard pill to swallow when you're going through everything that you went through, that this is happening for you, not to you. And we can become a victim to our child's disorders, our life situations. And that invitation, that just subtle thing that she would teach me of like, can you love him like this? Can you love him right now? It's kind of what you're talking about. Like past all the symptoms, past the difficult behavior, past the dysregulation, can you love him like this? Sometimes the answer was, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Hard.
And making sure that we are taking the time to take care of ourselves. I have a clinic here in Colorado Springs. We see over 100 clients a day, and I have no problem pulling a mom aside and saying, I need you to get into therapy, or I need you to make an appointment, right? Because oftentimes we're just pouring in and we're doing from a place of depletion. And when we're trying to pour into something and we don't have anything, we're not helping the child, nor are we, and we're depleting ourselves, right? Even though you think you're pouring in, when you're pouring in from depletion, you're not actually pouring anything in.
Right.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with like the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers. And so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do the exposures. Before it was really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it. So it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com.
So what are some things that parents can do to start taking care of themselves, which is kind of like your mentally strong program? I feel like it's for adults and it's for kids, but it starts with parents, right? If we can't do this ourselves, how are we going to be able to do it for our kids?
And I think because we don't have time, we often take our child and to the therapist or to, whatever, types of interventions you're doing in hopes that someone else can fix it. Mm-hmm. But you are the closest person and you have the most influence over your child. Now, when they get to be teenagers, that's not as true, but the most important thing is to know how to love yourself. And I'll have people say, well, I don't love myself. I said, well, we have to start there, right? Because you want your child to love themselves, right? And you don't love yourself. So that it's almost impossible for you to teach. It's impossible for you to take someone on a journey that you haven't been on.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty of this, and I'm an educated person, right? I was coming up to my 50th birthday and I was like, what actually fills my cup? And people are like, oh, go for a massage or go for, get your nails done. Getting my nails done is like a chore. That's just another thing that I'm supposed to do. Yeah. That is not self-care to me, right?
No, me either.
But I think sometimes we, again, convince ourselves what externally people are saying you're supposed to be doing for yourself. But if you do it and you don't feel better, then that's not filling your cup. So when I say loving yourself, you have to know yourself. Then you have to like yourself in order to love yourself. We're trying to jump to love ourselves, but we don't even know ourselves. And so the first part of filling your cup or self-care is knowing what does that and making that a priority, whatever that is, right? We talk about movement or exercise being super important. And I spent 10 plus years running, hate it with a passion, but I do it because that's, that's what you need. You need cardio, this and that, but you don't need another chore, right? You do need movement, but what kind of movement actually makes you happy? So if they say, oh, all you need to do is go for, at least a 10-minute walk. If you feel better after a 10-minute walk, great. If you have just ruminated that whole 10 minutes and come back like stressed out because you could have been doing so much more, you didn't just fill your cup, you just added another responsibility.
Yeah.
We've got plenty of responsibilities. And this is going to be different for every single person. But you saw in the documentary, I took like a gymnastics class. Absolutely love it. I take this little circus class sometimes. I'm 52 years old. I don't care what people think. Like,
you're flexible. Like, how is she doing that headstand thing? It's like, that's not happening here.
But I actually feel good after I go to that kind of exercise class. I feel good after yoga. I hate HIIT training. So why would I do that? Right. And then also when it comes to, leisure activities, making sure that, when you say you're taking a break to fill your cup, that the thing that you're choosing to do actually fills your cup. So for, some people want to stay home in an afternoon, someone else take the kids and they just read a book.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't really fill my cup because I only read like, nonfiction books. So I'm learning. So it's not really, but that for some people, that's what they need. And, it really doesn't have to be like a huge amount of time. It's figuring out what actually fills your cup so that the time that you do have is spent, truly, filling your cup.
Yeah. And then you model that for your kids because if your kids don't know themselves and they don't know what they love and what resets them or what fills their cup, it's like that first step that you're talking about of getting to know yourself. Some people don't ever know themselves. And with our kids, sometimes what fills their cup isn't what we want to fill their cup. I was actually just having a conversation with my 21-year-old last night because she comes back from college and she is just, especially since my husband died, she's like co-parenting, and she's like, Mom, he's been up in his room for 10 hours and, he needs vitamin D and and I don't know how he can't get restless. And it's like, he loves that. Like, he loves gaming. Is it what I want him to do? No, it's his summer and he's laughing. I can hear him laughing and enjoying himself. And it's like, I think that's hard for parents is what our kids like to do. Sometimes we see as a negative, it's too much screen time or it's too much gaming or it's, or I want them to exercise. So they need to go for a walk or they need, a lot of the needs. And I like what you're talking about. Like, first of all, modeling it for ourselves and then modeling it for our kids and moving into that acceptance too of what they like and what might light them up is not really going to always be something that we're like, woohoo. I'm so glad that they're picking that.
and respecting the differences. Like a lot of times when we, runners are a perfect example. They're like, oh, running is the best thing. If you just ran, you would feel good, both physically and mentally. And that's because it fills your cup, right? And the same, I had a patient who severe autism and the parents were like trying to, be doing ABA 60 plus hours a week, which is exhausting for both the kid and the parents, right? And no screen time. Oh, that, he would have a fit with screen. And this is a severe case of autism, but he would, hurt himself, destroy property, all of these things. We tried medications nothing would work. And finally, the parents actually were getting a divorce and mom had full custody. And she's like, forget this. I'm getting him a phone. And having that constant stimulation, which sure is not healthy, but it's not healthy for him to be hitting himself or hitting, destroying property either. Right. So taking everything from a filter standpoint. So yes, you read this article about screen time and how that's, not good and blah, blah, blah. But like, how do we balance that into the realities of our children, what they need, what fills their cup, and then use it as a reward rather than, trying to control all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think it's a balance. And I think it's like finding what they're passionate about and then supporting it, obviously if it's healthy and it's not drugs or alcohol or addiction, something like that, but And, there's boundaries in everything, but I do agree. I think just meeting them where they're at. I mean, every time my son says he's interested in anything, and he's interested in weird stuff, he mentioned crocheting. He's like, I want to crochet. And I was like, he had a crochet kit on his desk the same day. I was like, Amazon, deliver the crochet kit. He hasn't touched it, but that opportunity, that string is there. Like, I'm going to supply you with whatever your passion is so that you can start to identify who you are as a person, and gaming is a part of it. Arm knitting is a part of it, whatever he wants to do. But I love the way that it's like starts with us. And I think sometimes parents, I'm sure you notice this in your practice too. I feel like parents put their life on hold until their child is cured or better. And sometimes this is a lifelong journey. No one wants to hear that. That can be really overwhelming. But I've moved into acceptance of I don't know what the future holds. And we want to start living now, no matter what, which can be hard when you're in crisis constantly.
Yeah. And finding their zone of genius too. Like there's, we often have a limited scope of what we think people can do. Like, oh, if they could go to college, they could do this, this, and this, or trade. But if your child's not really interested in any of those things, they're interested in something. Something fills their cup. And trying to figure that out early is going to help. I always think of the show Big Bang Theory. I don't know if you watched that one.
Yeah.
But, socially awkward, not doing the right thing on multiple levels, right? But a genius in this one area, right? And even from a milder perspective, like when I was in school, I didn't think I was smart. Academically, I don't do well on like standardized tests and things that I have to like memorize and regurgitate and read and regurgitate. And my whole childhood, I thought I was dumb. And I realize now I'm actually really smart. It just has to be in kind of interpersonal relationships, like emotional intelligence, but also interpersonal, like nursing skills and caretaking skills and things like that. So, when your kids are young, like trying to figure those things out and exposing them to as many things as possible, because you don't know. We often think, within our scope, like what do we know about, and we teach that, but can we get some other opportunities?
Yeah. And I think looking at our kids as more than their disorders or more than their labels is so important. And that's hard when you are in crisis and your child's really not doing well. But I think that's something that we can, like, we're more than mothers and we're more than parents, and finding ourselves, but then also finding our kids. And I always say, follow the passion and then everything else will follow. I always say that with my kids. And I always said that to the clients that I would see too, is like, what's your passion? And giving them an opportunity. I think with anxiety and OCD too, like getting them to show us what they're interested in and then just supporting that. Because I think we have our own, a lot of times as parents, we can have our own agenda and just letting them letting them lead, whether it is even making a YouTube channel or doing something that you're like, oh, this is the worst thing ever, depending on their age. But even my 13-year-old, and we talk so much about anxiety and OCD. It's hard for that not to be their identity because they hear it so much. They're dragged to conferences. They're just exposed ad nauseum. They're all in therapy and, medication. And so it's like, that can become our kids' identity. It could become our identity as far as taking them just to these appointments and then just reading and consuming everything about anxiety and OCD. But finding those little gems, those little sparks. My daughter, my 13-year-old, is like so creative, but like she'll like draw these like detailed like models of what she's going to make, and then she'll make them, and she'll make like little miniature stuff. And eventually and she's really good at math. And I was like, you're really good at art and you're really good at math and you're really good at building stuff. And I was like, you'd be an amazing architect. And she'd never even really heard of architecture. I was just like, your superpowers could really combine. And I just said that maybe like a year ago. And I hear her now, she's 13. She's like, I think I might want to be an architect, and just like combining her like superpowers. And I think fueling, not that it's going to ever turn into a career, but just helping them double down on their identity outside of their disorders can be so powerful.
And not everybody's going to have, a great career. That's not their
That's
purpose,
true too.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think as parents, like you said earlier, we think our success is, what our children choose to do, but there's so much value outside of career. Like we put a lot of value on career and, finding that right thing. But
yeah. And I think our kids worry about it. I just feel like that's the generation. Like my 21-year-old is like consumed with how she's not going to get a job, and she's going to be a senior in college and she's doing an art degree. Like she's studying how to do like game design or movie storyboarding. Like she's in California and that's what she's doing. And I'm like, there's always jobs. Like there's always an income, your passion and your income. But I think that it is this climate, especially for our older kids and us, this stress that we add to them for meeting these goalposts and doing these things and putting ourselves in check as well, which can be tricky.
And I want to go back to the severe example that you talked about of some of the parents that their kids won't leave the room. They're having, pretty significant anxiety, can't get them to go to school. And I want to really, the most important step for those parents right now is to take care of themselves. And I know we're it feels like we're beating a dead horse, but I can give you an example. We'll have, parents come in and we, trying to adjust medication wise, recommend, specific types of therapy, but they can't get their kid to go to the therapy. They're kind of giving up, then they feel judged because the providers are saying, well, it's, you've got to make them do that. But they feel like they are trying to make them, but they're not budging, and I've had parents say to me, what do you want me to do? Like drag them out of their room. But it all comes down to your presence, right? If there's a battle between you and your child and their will is stronger than yours, they win. They win. And I'm not saying everything has to be a battle. It really should be more of a dance. I used to describe when I would fight with my teenagers, like it was like a tug of war. I'd give a little bit, and then I'd have to pull back because they'd make bad decisions. And I realized it's really more of a dance, and we're the instructor. But if we don't know how to dance, that we're not leading. We're just like, we're stressing that please make the right decision because I can't, and then you're trying to make them with discipline, or reward if you understand, that reward is more powerful. But when nothing's working and this loop of energy that you and your child is going through, only you can fix by working on yourself. Like you can't, fight it out of them.
Right. And there's only so much you can do. I mean, there comes, you can't physically do it. So, and a lot of parents are in that position where they're offering, I just got a message from a parent this morning where their child is just spiraling and they're hospitalized and they're like, I feel like such a bad parent. And you're like, you've done everything you possibly can. You have provided the therapy, you've provided the support. That's all we can do is we can offer those services, or we can show up in our most intentional way 40% of the time. Because I think no one's, we're all human.
Right. Absolutely.
But then the rest is them. And what do you do with that? There are situations where there's literally nothing you can do that is going to move the dial for your child in this particular chapter of their life. And being able to take care of yourself while you're dealing with that is the best gift you can give them, like you're saying, because when you do take care of yourself, you're going to show up with more intention. And I feel like that's...
And they're going to energetically feel that. It's going to be different. So and the other word that we use a lot is boundaries. And I've recently switched that in my vocabulary to limits, because boundaries make it sound like it has to be like this every time. Like there's this, this is my boundary. And so then we feel guilty if we let the child go over the boundary. But then, we get real rigid with the boundary. And if we call it a limit and it can ebb and flow, where, I can say, not today, not today, I'm not doing this today. Right. Instead of I'm never doing this with you. Right. is a very different statement. It's today, my limit is. So when we say limits, we can let them ebb and flow rather than, creating these hard boundaries or rules. And then it's causing us so much stress to maintain them.
Right. Because we're trying to like be consistent.
Yeah. And this is, I think ABA is great, but it's not practical for everyday life. I think the theory of reward is more powerful than punishment. If we can, just try to incorporate that as much as possible. But this constant ABA of boundaries and testing, and it would just be exhausting.
Yeah. And for the child, I think having our kids feel success, even if they're not able to, leave their bedroom, what are they doing today that's successful? They got up, and I think that's a hard shift for parents too. I was actually just talking about that in a post I made today about shifting my perspective on my son and just being like, what is he doing right? Versus what is he doing wrong? And it's very easy for us to look at our kids and just see all the disorder, and I want him here and he's waking up late and he's going to bed late and he's not eating 3 meals and he's not getting any sunlight and he's not exercising. We can just make this list in our head. And part of it is a fear of failure with ourselves of this is a reflection of me. I'm looking in a mirror. This means I'm a bad parent because I'm allowing, quote unquote, allowing all this to happen when there's so much you can control and not control. But looking at our kids from a different lens of growth and love and what things are they doing right? I've been trying to watch my words when he wakes up late, 1 o'clock or whatever. And instead of saying what time did you go to bed? That's the first thing I would say to him. What time did you go to bed? Instead, I'm trying to purposely be good morning. Did you sleep well? And that does not intuitively come out of my mouth. The first thing I want to say is, what time do you go to bed? You look really tired. But when you take care of yourself, like you're saying, you have more space. There's space to be intentional because you're not operating on fumes. And so it does impact our kids because then I'm able to pause, catch the words before they come out of my mouth and be like, nope, that's not the first thing you're going to say to him. And then say something a little bit better. Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect.
Well, I wonder if you can tell us where we can find you and your work because I love your approach. I love your messaging. And I know that you are in the trenches. You've been in the trenches. And so you talk the talk, you walk the walk. And I always appreciate that with people.
Yeah. So my website is mentallystrong.com. I would love to offer a free book of my pain and purpose. That's my story of just all of the pain that I've been able to turn into purpose. I work with mostly mothers who are trying to take care of themselves. So we have mini intensives. We have a mentally strong intensive. We have private intensives where you can come out to Colorado and really dig deep in figuring out how to think through your problems, organize them, and make choices in line with what you want. And all that information can be found on mentallystrong.com.
Oh, wow. That's neat.
Yeah.
I didn't know you did intensives and people can come to Colorado and do that. That's fascinating. Yeah. Well, definitely check out her work. I'll leave a link in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on. It was great talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that interview. I would really recommend getting her book and watching her documentary. It was really well done and so powerful to see all the things that we can go through as human beings, so much loss, despair, and struggle, and be able to still be standing and enjoying life and being mentally strong in a way that is resilient, but also compassionate, self-compassionate. So check her out. I will leave a link in the show notes, like I said before, at mentallystrong.com. Soak up her stuff. She is fascinating, and I really enjoyed talking with her. Well, I hope that you're enjoying the podcast in general. Don't forget to hit a star and rate the podcast. If you write a review, I'll be reading it next time, I promise. Don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do. And I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.